Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, LinkedIn Live. How are we doing? How has your week been? So, I'm trying to position myself so that I'm not blocking the slides. So this morning, slightly different format. So I'm doing a bit of a deep dive, as you know, I do these every now and then. And the topic that I'm deep diving into is paternity leave. Interestingly, we're kind of used to people, and particularly women, I guess, advocating for maternity leave, and we can talk about, why that has been. But actually, something that really fuels gender equality in terms of, opportunities for men as well as women is having equal paternity leave. So I'm going to run through. A few slides with you. We're going to sort of first look at some of the global comparisons. So what happens by country? Why is it that men suddenly want more in terms of paternity leave? What is greedy work? So there is a concept out there that's called greedy work, which is something that has been identified as fueling the not the gender pay gap, the parent pay gap. And we'll talk about what that is. We'll look at what good looks like in terms of paternity leave. So what are the best companies doing? And then we'll do a little bit of a kind of run through of how to do this. So if you're currently probably one of the companies that isn't offering a particularly generous paternity leave package, how would you move to offering something that's more generous? So hopefully this is going to be useful. Please do, sort of share it with colleagues, etc. If it's something that you're currently looking at. I know when I reached out to some of my HR contacts and former clients and colleagues, etc., I know that quite a few people said this is something you are currently looking at. So paternity leave is a hot topic, okay, as is gender equality, in particular looking at the needs of men and boys in society and in the workplace. So let's start with a little bit of a global comparison here. So I was kind of interested to see, okay, how do various countries rank? I work with global organizations, and so I thought, okay, how do various countries rank when it comes to paternity leave? South Korea tops the OECD countries. We've also got Estonia, actually, which is really generous in terms of its paternity leave, but South Korea tops the ranking. South Korea and Japan. So I think South Korea is 53 weeks. Japan is 52 weeks, right? So huge amounts of paid parental leave if you want to head east. The UK is below average, and I'm going to show you some of the figures on the next slide. And the US ranks amongst the bottom. Those of you that work for American companies, when it comes to any sort of leaves, whether it's maternity leave, paternity leave, annual leave, holidays, whatever it be, the US is a very sort of workaholic type culture. I don't think I'm saying anything out of turn there that people don't know. So it's probably not surprising to say that the US ranks bottom. The UK, so just before I go into the stats by country, the UK since 2015, many people will know that the UK has something called shared parental leave, which is basically where, either parent of any gender can share up to 52 weeks leave. It's not fully paid, and actually, there is a little bit of a financial penalty. Certainly, I think this is one of the reasons that the take up is so low for men in particular. It's seen as there being still a financial penalty to take this shared parental leave. So the take up, and I've got there, the take up is less than 10%. There's some dispute around the take up. I don't know how accurately it's measured. So you've got some people saying that the take up of shared parental leave is as low as 2%, and some people saying that it's as high as 7%. So I've gone for, look, it's less than 10% of people that are eligible to take shared parental leave are actually using that facility. So let's just have a look into the figures a little bit more closely. I will share this slide. In fact, let me just change the layout here so you can see this slide a little bit better. So on the left there, you've got the number of weeks of paid father-only leave. So where only the father can take that leave. And you can see, as I said earlier, Korea and Japan right at the top. This is OECD countries. I think this chart was from 2019. And obviously these things do change quite regularly. Countries are sort of changing them all the time. I know that Canada recently has introduced more generous paternity leave in 2022, for example. So this might be slightly out of date, just because it takes quite long for obviously for organisations to pull the figures together. So you've got Korea and Japan towards the top. You've got quite a lot then of the EU countries. You've obviously got, unsurprisingly, perhaps some of the Scandinavian countries. So, sort of like Norway, Sweden. Sweden, interestingly, was one of the first countries to introduce equal parental leave in 1974, I think it was. So a year before the UK brought in, kind of started dabbling, I would say, in maternity leave in 1975 for the UK. In 1974, Sweden brought it. Sweden is very egalitarian in terms of its ethos as a country. So in 1974, Sweden actually brought in equal parental leave back then. So it's perhaps not surprising to see, the likes of Sweden, Norway, Finland, etc. And I think what's interesting about those countries in particular, they're very much, it's a case of the father has to take the leave. The leave cannot be given to, the mother or somebody that isn't of a sort of male gender identity. So this is, and this goes back to, sort of like really encouraging men to step into those roles, acknowledging the benefits that, children get when their fathers are involved, if that's the setup. Obviously, we're talking generally about a sort of like hetero couple. So yeah, you've got the Scandinavian countries up there, obviously. You've got then the OECD average. So the OECD countries, countries that are, sort of presumed to be sort of like fairly well advanced and developed economically, etc. The average is 9 weeks of paid father-only leave at a average rate of pay of 44.9%, right? So that's the average across OECD countries. You can see that the UK is still way below that in terms of statutory. So bear in mind, this is statutory. This is what the government says has to be given. So in the UK, it's 2 weeks, and it's a week. It's statutory pay, statutory parental pay. So it's at quite a low rate, so not necessarily attractive. The reason that you don't see the US on here is it's so low. It's at zero in terms of sort of mandated leave. And interestingly, in the US, I think the last time the Pew Research Center did some work on this, in I think it was 2022, and they surveyed individuals and employees and employers to see, what did people want in terms of paternity leave. And 1 in 7 said that they didn't think fathers needed paternity leave, which is, I don't know, there's a public conversation I think that needs to happen in the US in terms of paternity leave. So here we are. So the UK doesn't fare as well as we would imagine, actually. And I think this is why a lot of companies are probably doing a lot more than the statutory amount. So if we just move on to why is this now topical? Well, as well as the whole sort of gender equality piece, in terms of, so we know that when men start to take on the role of caregiver, it helps to kind of actually balance up the share of housework. So we sometimes talk about women who have children going to work, so working mothers going to work and then coming home and doing what's called a second shift. So still having to do, the lion's share of the caregiving if you've got children, and or the lion's share of the housework. Okay, so one of the real reasons for getting fathers involved in paternity leave is kind of just enabling men to flex more into that sort of role. And certainly a lot more young men actually do want to take up this role and want to be more involved as fathers. And it's definitely seen as advantageous for the future prospects of boys in society, having male role models and father figures around, etc. So this is a good thing. And, men are finally sort of like getting on the page that this is a good thing as well. And that, raising children and being a caregiver isn't just the remit of women. It's not just women that can be nurturing and caring. So what's happening in terms of trends? So men wanting more stay-at-home dads. So in the UK, the Guardian did a survey post-pandemic, and we've got a link to that below. But stay-at-home dads have risen from being 1 in 14 before the pandemic to now 1 in 9. So 11% of stay-at-home parents is a stay-at-home dad, right? Which I think would surprise some people. So more than 10% of stay-at-home parents, stay-at-home dads. Okay, and so I think this is going to become more the norm. We sometimes hear dads talking about things like, when they're sort of doing the school drop-off, sometimes getting, the strange looks and maybe not being accepted into the mum's circle. And we've got, websites like Mumsnet in here in the UK, which is sometimes actually quite, almost like quite protective of that role of carer, wanting almost like to stick to a very traditional set of role models. And so men sometimes not feeling welcome in those spaces that were traditionally designated for mothers. I think with the increase in sort of like, non-hetero couples, this hopefully starting to reduce anyway, but certainly where you do have men that are the primary caregiver, stay-at-home dads, etc., we need to be encouraging and welcoming more of that, and we need to destigmatize it, rather than it being such a big deal. If you would have seen the thumbnail that I had for this live, this LinkedIn Live, you would have seen a tweet by Piers Morgan from a few years ago, where Daniel Craig, who was obviously one of the recent Bonds, was filmed carrying his baby in a is it a papoose that they call it, I think, where you got the baby strapped on the front. So Daniel Craig was pictured carrying his baby, and Piers Morgan sort of tweeted a comment that was something like, "Oh no, 007, not you as well." And he did get a lot of stick, and Piers Morgan sort of said it was just because it was a papoose and you'd never see Bond wearing a papoose. He sort of said, he wasn't criticizing the fact that he was there carrying his own child, but who knows. But certainly we need to destigmatize the role of fathers as caregivers. And then one of the things I wanted to talk about is quiet quitting. Now, I don't know, you can call it quiet quitting, or you can just call it reducing hours. But there was a survey in January 2023. I'm just reaching for one of my notes. But basically, in January 23, men typically earning more than six figures, overwhelmingly responded to a survey to say, I am reducing the number of hours that I'm working. Right. So, and this was across the globe. So this is a case of now everybody is now saying, look, we're working too much. And I think certainly, going into the pandemic, I think the pandemic changed our expectations of work and life and what work-life balance means. And so now even men, high-earning men are saying, we don't want to work as many hours. So I think, along with that, we're sort of seeing more societal shifts. And I think along with that will come, we don't want to work as many hours because actually we want to do stuff outside of work. We want to have a life outside of work, but also we want to have time for families, where we've got children. We want time to have time with children, time with, sort of parents and other family members, etc., that we may care for. So that's one of the reasons. Post-pandemic, as I spoke about, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people think of the pandemic as having been very detrimental for women. Some people saying, oh, this is going to set the gender pay gap X many years, and women were picking up the lion's share of the homeschooling and blah, 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 and all this sort of thing. I'm not sure. I think the science is a little bit inconclusive. I think I've seen surveys that say that that's correct, and I've seen surveys going the other way. And actually, because I'm focusing here on, what it is that men need in terms of, to take on these different roles. I have seen surveys that are saying that men are doing more. Men are more active in the lives of their children as a result of the pandemic. So as a result of, starting to get used to being able to take the kids to school and all of those sorts of things, men kind of realized actually they were missing out a little bit. So I think there is hope. I am a real Pollyanna. Pollyanna is like a sort of a word used for people that are super positive. So I am a bit of a Pollyanna, but I do think that the pandemic has created a little bit of societal shift in men in terms of taking the foot off the gas a little bit, but also wanting to spend more time with children and family. And then mental health, is obviously a huge topic when it comes to men and patterns of working and, roles and masculinity and all of those sorts of things. We know that in the UK, suicide and another term that I've come across recently, which is deaths of despair. So things like suicide, we know is one of the biggest causes of deaths in men in the UK, right? So, mental health is a biggie. And so I think because of that and the focus on mental health for men in particular, I know lots of organisations are doing work on this, which I think is fantastic, because I think at the moment we've got so much emphasis on things like menopause and menstrual leave and all sorts of things for women, and all of that's great. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have that, but at the same time we need to recognize men's health needs as well. So increased focus on mental health, I think, is going to lead to, more men wanting time to have more of a balance, and that includes time to be that full-time father. And then just general well-being, which sort of really links into the mental health, but also in terms of physical health. There are advantages in terms of creating that work-life balances, advantages not only in terms of mental health, but also in terms of physical health. And I've got there at the bottom, it's kind of one of my favorite sayings. If you come from a world of change management and projects, you'll have heard this before. It's kind of like the 6 Ps. Prior proper planning prevents poor performance. And I think when it comes to, men moving into different types of roles, there is something about planning, how you plan your time and what's important, in your time, in your day, in your week, and your month, etc. And we'll come on to that in terms of sometimes there are types of jobs that make it more difficult for you to take control of your time. But I think there's something about, men in particular. This is something I think that women, especially working mothers, have had to do a lot, planning out your time and, working very smart, working efficiently. And I think this is something that dads are going to find themselves doing much more as well. So going on to this concept of greedy work, I don't know whether anybody's come across it. I would say if you haven't come across it, I would encourage you to go and do some research on it. It's a term that's been coined by a world-renowned economist. So sort of like looking at the dynamics of things like the gender pay gap and the parent pay gap, actually. There's this description of what's called greedy work, and greedy work is basically, it's often found, so the industries where it's often found: law, financial services, accountancy. I'm an accountant by background. I know a lot of people are like, what, you're an accountant? No disrespect to any accountants out there listening. So law, financial services, accountancy, some of just a few of the industries that are named, but greedy work is a definition of jobs, or the type of work or the type of sectors that typically reward very long hours. And the reward is almost like, well, it's completely disproportionate, to the number of hours you're putting in. So it's not a case of, you work a couple of hours and you're kind of getting the equivalent of time and a half. It's kind of like if you repeatedly, are working like 70, 80-hour weeks or whatever, you earn exponentially more. You're earning into the six and seven figures, etc. So rewarding very, very long hours, rewarding people that work at weekends. And again, I don't mean that you're rewarding that person for your time. I mean that you're rewarding people because they are willing to work at weekends. So you create this culture where it becomes the norm. And you see this, especially with very senior people and, the C-suite and maybe the C-suite -1. So people that are maybe knocking on the door of the boardroom, trying to get in there, people that routinely work at weekends. How many of us remember working for bosses that you would get emails all weekend? You get emails at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. I used to get emails sometimes. I'm not gonna name and shame them. Although I did have a boss. If anybody's read my book, you'll know that I had a boss that, if anybody's watched the film The Devil Wears Prada, we used to have a boss. I'm not going to say what position they were, but it was when I was in finance, and we used to call them Miranda Priestley. We used to call them Miranda because they were so demanding. But sometimes, you would get these requests at like 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning that they were emailing. And I used to say, and this was in the days of BlackBerry, so you can tell how old I am. And I used to be like, have they like got their BlackBerry in bed with them or something? And they're literally emailing, in the middle of the night with requests. Anyway, so weekend working, so people that are always on, constantly on, and willing to work on holidays as well. So the sorts of people that are willing to, take their laptop with them on holiday, even if they're on holiday with their family, they're willing to take their laptop on holiday with them. I'm smiling because I remember the one story, just to share this with you as well. A colleague at that same organization, actually, I remember him saying, I think I'm going to say it was one particular holiday. I can't remember whether it was around Christmas time or whether it was around bonfire and fireworks time, but he was away with his family on a trip to Alton Towers, which is a UK theme park. And this same boss made sure that he had his laptop with him. So he was literally carrying his laptop around the theme park. Okay. So being willing to literally be on all the time. This is a feature of greedy work. And then jump how high. This is like, when that boss or when that type of work says you need to jump, you say how high. And I have put in 24-hour shifts before, and I have had people, I'm embarrassed to say almost, in my team put in 24-hour shifts. Not often, but I've worked on things like deals and M&A and all of that. And anybody that's worked in the world of mergers and acquisitions and deals and things like that know that sometimes things get crazy like that, right? But this is greedy work. This is the definition of greedy work. And if you are willing to put that time in, potentially at the sacrifice of, children, family, other responsibilities, a social life, you get rewarded for it, right? And this is why it's called greedy work. We're not saying that the individuals are greedy, by the way. At least I don't think we are. We're saying that the work is greedy, right? It demands a lot of you. So yeah, that is the definition of greedy work. So what does good look like? What are good companies doing? 6 months full pay, and thank you so much to the HR colleagues that I reached out to that came back to me. So many of you said, "Oh, we're just thinking about this. We're just currently thinking about, what we need to do in terms of paternity leave." Many of you came back, actually, even small organizations came back and said, "Yep, we're 6 months full pay. We're 6 months full pay, father only paid, or 6 months." I mean, obviously now we've moved into kind of talking about parental leave, right, rather than sort of maternity and paternity leave. But 6 months full pay, father only. So I would be encouraging organisations to still, even if you've moved to parental leave, which is great, I would say that you still want to be encouraging a culture where men are encouraged to take that leave as well. So if they're in a hetero relationship, the men are encouraged to take that parental leave. And when we sort of get into the how, I'll sort of like explain why I think that's important. So 6 months of full pay for the father. In terms of what good looks like, I would encourage organizations to look at parental leave beyond just the early years. So is there something about maybe staggering parental leave or opening that opportunity up again? I think that as we become more informed around, what children need, especially in this age of social media and increased anxiety and, reduced attention span and all of those things for children and adolescents and teenage brain development and all of that, I won't be surprised if we start to see organizations encouraging more, whether or not it's full leave, so it's, full time off, or whether it's just encouraging more flexible working requests way into sort of like the teen years to support teenagers through some of the more challenging times when the brains are still developing. The brains are incredibly plastic, the level of plasticity is very high in the brain. I think there's a really strong argument, and there's a lot of science now saying that that teenage developing brain needs parents around a lot more, I think, than we have realized. So I won't be surprised if that starts to happen. One of the things I found really interesting when I was looking at some of the companies, and I've got a few of them here, Netflix, apparently, although it's not I don't know how widely publicised it is. So, so caveat this, because obviously it's come off the internet, so who knows? But apparently Netflix offers 52 weeks, 52 paid weeks. There are more companies that offer more than 6 months, even here in the UK. I think so. I'm going to say Standard Life Aberdeen offers 40 weeks, 40 weeks of full pay, for both maternity leave and paternity leave. And yeah, the 6 months is almost now just becoming like the baseline. I feel like everybody's moving. I was surprised. A lot of the companies that got back to me this week in terms of, how much leave do you give? It ranged from, for the American owned companies, it was 2 weeks, and we managed to push it to 4. And for some of the other countries, so I've had people, from the UAE, from Dubai, that responded, and they sort of said, it's 6 days. I think it was 6 days, 5 days or 6 days or something. As to whether some companies in those countries will do more, I think we'll start to see that. But yeah, apparently, Netflix, in terms of private global organizations, maybe one of the gold standards. I don't know whether that's available globally. Maybe it is, who knows? But if that's the case, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more people applying to Netflix. So how to do this? So a lot of people told me that they are evaluating their paternity leave. So if you're currently at the slightly more stingy end of paternity leave, what should you be doing? So I would say, in this order, find an exec sponsor first, a man. Find a male exec sponsor to champion paternity leave. Ideal if it's a man that's maybe got family already, but maybe even one that is kind of just thinking about that they might want to have the choice to have a family and would want to be supported with more paternity leave. So find an exec sponsor. Do your homework in terms of the benchmarks. It's quite easy to find out what's out there in terms of within your sector, within your country, within your region, etc. If you're a global organization, obviously do that benchmarking across country, as well as within your sector as well, especially if your teams work together. So if you have cross-country teams, then, they're going to talk. And although obviously there are statutory differences, you don't really want there to be too much disparity between different countries. So do that benchmarking across sector, across country and region. Canvas opinion. So maybe do some survey monkeys, or, if you just happen to run pulse surveys, like quarterly staff surveys, maybe just drop some questions in that say, look, we're thinking of looking at this. What are your thoughts around it? What do you think would be fair, etc. Get creative. So one of the reasons that this doesn't happen is people can't figure out how to, I don't know why it is, because we've figured out how to backfill women's roles when it comes to maternity leave, but for some reason, I don't know why we seem to think that it's going to be any different for when it's men's roles. I mean, at the end of the day, men sometimes take extended leave due to illness. Maybe somebody has an operation, or, men do take extended leave and businesses don't fall over. I think that there is just something about, when it's attached to what is a fairly gendered space, we tend to struggle with how are we going to cope, if men take extended leave. I think we need to kind of just become creative. So job sharing is one of the things that I've written. There's a really famous case study of two senior execs at Aviva. I won't name them. I'll probably drop a link in if I remember. But two senior execs at Aviva, who have very generous paternity leave. Actually, they're up there at the top, and they have been featured for their job share. They've been job sharing for years. Which is something, when we think about job sharing, we sometimes think of very junior roles, maybe even we think of maybe like administrative roles, and we probably typically think of women. But the fact that you've got, two senior men at Aviva, so it's Sam White and Will McDonald from Aviva, both at director level, job sharing long term, it can be done. Okay, so get creative. And again, this is a great way to if you're canvassing opinion and you're using your maybe if you've got employee resource groups or affinity networks, use those individuals to kind of come up with creative solutions. You'd be amazed what you can come up with once you give it some thought. So that's it for today. Paternity leave. Please, share this video. If it's something that you're thinking about, share this video amongst your colleagues. If you've got those affinity networks, get them working on this. It really is a big part of leveling up in terms of, not just gender pay gap, but also just giving equal opportunity for men to have richer roles, in not just in the workplace but in society and in life, more broadly. And it's good for, it's good for everyone, good for families, good for communities, good for workplaces. That's it. Thank you for joining. See you next time. As always, have a fantastic weekend. Bye, guys.